Hi, everyone. I am Gwen Callahan, the co-director of the HPLFF Film Festival, and I am joined by Andrea Schmitz from Mistletoe and Michael Schlane from Reflections of a Dead Man. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for the Q&A.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Great to be here.
I'm like, you can talk now, it's okay. We are live, and this will be recorded for people to watch later. So if you're watching and you're just joining us, there are 6 short blocks to watch and 3 feature films, and then a bunch of extras like author readings and a couple panels and our keynote speech from Aaron Moorhead that are all available until Tuesday the 22nd. So you still have a couple more days to finish watching all of that stuff. But back to our Q&A participants. Andrea, your film Mistletoe is a lovely kind of adaptation, loose adaptation, if I am understanding correctly, of an H.H. Bailey story, and about a baron who, he basically murders his wife.
Yeah, the original, he does not do that. We added that part. It's the original is like the mistletoe bough story where there's like a wedding and then the bride either runs away or goes to play hide and seek, and she ends up accidentally locking herself in a trunk, and then like the groom goes mad with grief and like they never find her, and then they find her body years later and it's all gross and everyone's sad, and that's kind of the whole story. It's just a cautionary tale about not getting in trunks that might lock. But and originally we were going to play it straight. I rewrote the poem to be just kind of like more readable, and then we made like the first third of it, and then we were like, what if it's his fault? Then it's way more funny. And then we did like the next bit, and then we were like, oh, we need him to come back, and there needs to be like a kind of like, to do the ending, we had to add another section, so we were kind of like changing the story as we were working on it for the whole production.
Okay. The animation style is really unique. I really like the way that it looks like cut out kind of paper, but at the same time like colored in. It gives it really nice texture. Do you do everything animated in your work?
Yeah, so I personally do everything digitally animated, not 3D, just like very like flat things. And then I work a lot with layers and puppeted animation where everything is like, this is a layer and this is a layer and then this is a layer, and it moves like that. Andrea Sparacchio, who is my co-director, who did that, like the whole thing looks like her style. The whole thing is illustrated in her style. She has this really specific looking style that lends itself really well to this kind of genre and story. And she's made animation before, but she's done it in like iMovie. She knows After Effects now, and she's made all these little Nosferatu shorts that are really great. But she's used to working in regular illustration. So she has this interesting way of like the perspective looks kind of different than you would expect. And like the characters are kind of built a little different. Sometimes you can see like the sketched layer underneath because they're on the same layer. Just because of her background coming out of like illustration to animation where everything needs to be separated. Like there are some things that are like a little accidental, but we kept them because they looked really good anyway, and it just like adds to the texture overall. And also like she'll make a lot of things in grayscale, and then I'll change the color of them when I get them to make it all kind of go together. But some of her grayscale is like hot pink, so it was just different values of hot pink. So like the clock originally is just hot pink clock with it. And I would have to like be like, maybe we can't get away with the clock, but some of the rooms are like an entirely purple room with one piece of red furniture. And I'm like, let's just keep it this way. I don't care if it's period accurate. Like there's a pink room, there's a turquoise room. So some of that is just like how she likes to work, and then we can change it later if it needs adjusting to not be like jarring. But we ended up with some interesting looking colors along the way because of that.
It really has a sense of playfulness, and I feel like your personalities come through in the the little things that you decided to not like correct and make perfect, and like the color choices and things like that. So I enjoy that kind of thing. Like I don't need everything to be like picture perfect. Like it feels more dynamic when you kind of leave in some of that, the imperfections
For
for
sure.
me. So interestingly, Michael Schlane, your film Reflections of a Dead Man, um, is loosely based on Man of the Crowd. And I think it's interesting that both of you kind of took stories that are kind of classic and then use them as a jumping off place to kind of make your
Mhm.
own film. Can you, where did you film your piece? Because it really looks like the Paris catacombs. Like, did you in fact film in a catacomb?
We filmed in the Paris catacombs.
Okay. Very nice.
Um, I mean, I can
And how
elaborate.
did you pull, how did you pull that off?
Well, so maybe I can give a bit more. I mean, the short answer to that is the whole film was shot on an iPhone,
Okay.
and the crew was me, and I had one other actor. Well, two other actors, but on the day, like I knew that um, I wanted to shoot a film in the catacombs and see if we can get away with it. Um, and I mean, the way we did it was we just got reservations and we walked in. And the way it's currently set up, by the way, we had no idea if this was going to work. We didn't know if there was a guided tour or what the deal was. I know in years past there had been tours. So we had actually shot an alternate ending at a different location on the possibility that we would get shut down. Um, at this point in the schedule, we shot over 2 days, and we'd already gotten kicked out of Père Lachaise cemetery for filming there without any kind of permission. So we were, a little bit sensitive about the possibility this might not work. But in short, the way it's set up, and I don't know that if I'm encouraging others to do what we have done, but um, once we bought a ticket and went in, there's essentially one corridor. So it doesn't branch off. There's really no way to get lost. It's just one really long corridor. And they just send the entire crowd through. So Rufo and I, Rufo, our actor, we went in, and basically when we got we would let people pass. And when we had a little bit of space, we would film some of the picture, and then when need be, I'm assuming everyone at this point has seen the movie, so I'm not hopefully spoiling anything. But Rufo's playing a couple of characters in this film, and so I was wearing I was wearing one costume, he was wearing the other costume, and then we would just switch costumes and we would shoot the other character. And that's how we did it. I mean, the entire film was done with this guerrilla filmmaking attitude that we would go into places that we had, I mean, certainly no permission to be in, and certainly uh, it would have been prohibitively expensive, and just prohibitive to try and shoot scenes there in any kind of, uh, well, the usual way. So the entire film was based on the premise that with an iPhone, and the iPhone was sometimes on a gimbal, sometimes it was handheld, depending on what we could get away with, that we could basically go in and very, very quietly film um, in working jazz club, or in the streets, or in the cemeteries, or in the catacombs. So it was all done with that guerrilla mindset.
So do you feel like, I mean, because when you're watching the film, you do kind of feel like you're stalking somebody and like you're kind of being sneaky. Do you feel like because you had to be kind of not obviously just following someone around with your phone out like this, that lent something to the way that the narrative came out or the way the visuals came out?
Oh, I'm sure. And I hadn't even considered that aspect of it. But by way of example, when we went in, I mean, the whole thing was improvised to a certain degree. I mean, we knew what the beats were. The voiceover hadn't been written at that point. So we just knew what the basic beats were, but we had no idea what to expect once we actually got into the location. So, by way of example, the the scene in the jazz club originally, there's sort of two moments. The first moment is when he sees the woman and then she disappears, and then the second moment, of course, is when he sees the Hat Man. Originally, my plan was to shoot all that stuff in in the main cellar. And this was this was the oh God, yeah, Cabo de la Huchette. Um, and we were planning on doing everything, yeah, doing everything in that cellar. But once we got in and paid our admission fee, we realized like that entire area was just completely packed with people. So there was no way we could get in there to film. So the way the club is organized, there's the lower level, the cellar, um, is, you know, where the band is and where it's a pretty big area. And then there is like a second level that's where there's like a bar area. And so we were kind of sitting in the bar area thinking like, okay, I guess like, are we going to wait till we have space until people leave? And Rufo, to his credit and God bless him, was like, well, you know, is there anything we can shoot up here? So basically we pivoted. And so currently what you see now, the moment where Rufo's character sees the mysterious woman at the bar, we shot that in the bar. And the way we were able to pull that off is literally Rufo sitting, there's like a tiny little table. He's on the other side. I'm sitting there with an iPhone. And at this point, you know, there's bartenders, there's staff. Like there's no way I'm whipping out uh, the gimbal. So we're being really low key. And to boot, the only way I could get a single of him was to hold, there was like one angle that was like super low that I could get him in frame and not get anything else. Literally, it was like it was over here, and that's all I could do. And I had a little light with me that I had bought that Rufo was hand holding under the table to give himself a key light. And so like that's an example of, in this case, necessity was dictating like exactly what that shot was, and the fact that we were in that that part of the club. So I mean, there are probably other examples, but it absolutely, you know, the having to do things in a clandestine way, and really just like having to improvise moment to moment based on the uncontrollable chaos of crowds and people and movement of cars. And so we had a few stories like that, but that's an example.
Oh my goodness. So just completely guerrilla style, like Larry Cohen wet dream of roaming around Paris and like just kind of stealing shots as you could.
Yeah, it was it was a little like French New Wave, and I was reminded by something that uh, Werner Herzog said one time, and it was something like, "To be a filmmaker, you must have almost a criminal mindset, but the important part is you must not get caught, because then you are just stupid."
Nice. It seems like just being, you know, filming on your iPhone, because like I see all the time tourists like just taking little videos of each other everywhere you go. Um, I imagine that if, you know, someone just told you to like, oh, you can't film here, you'd be like, oh, okay, sorry. Like just kind of slink out.
Well, and that actually did happen to us. Our very first our very first setup was at the Père Lachaise Cemetery And I had, again, the entire cemetery sequence was originally planned for that cemetery. I had scouted it out the weekend prior, so I had in mind, like, in this very vast and huge cemetery, very specific places where we were going to do certain things. And so our very first series of shots were there, and then this is sort of a classic thing. Like, we had everything pretty much in the can, but I was like, you know what? Let's just get one more take. Let's just get one more take of something I had like a lot of takes of. And of course, on that take, there was a security guard who saw us and came over and was in a huff and was wagging his finger and basically telling us like, yeah, we can't film here and we need to leave. So at that point, we had a choice to either tempt fate further or just to like, okay, the location's burned, let's go to plan B. And for a brief moment, I was like, okay, wow, I guess we're done. I mean, that was we had a major sequence that was planned there. And then again, Rufo, our actor, he says, well, there are two more cemeteries in Paris. Why don't we get kicked out of all of them? So we ended up going, well, we didn't get kicked out, but we ended up going to Montparnasse, and then we ended up, we did another one at, oh God, I'm like blanking the names of all the cemeteries, but we ended up the second sequence where, the Hat Man kind of goes into the mausoleum. We ended up shooting that, at, yeah, I think that was Montparnasse, and it worked out. It actually, that location ended up working better than the thing that I already originally had in mind. We just ended up having to do it on a different day and just scouting it right before. So another example of how we absolutely had to bob and weave and improvise and just like somehow have trust that we're going to find what we need and this thing was going to work out.
I imagine too that there was a lot of maybe out of necessity, kind of just like, okay, it was good enough versus
Yeah,
like, okay, perfect.
yeah. I mean, look, I mean, there's always that, and at the same time, there was a certain amount of like, it took sometimes a monstrous amount of takes just to get the good enough of, um, again, I mean, there's stories,
Okay.
um, but yeah, I mean, it was exactly like what do we need to get, and let's move on.
So I have a question for both of you, and that is like, what is it about ghostly stories or stories of the macabre that like draws you in? What is it that you're attracted to with that? Andrea, you go first.
Um, I think I wasn't calling myself a horror fan until a few years ago when I realized that horror didn't just mean slasher, I think. Because I've been watching spooky stuff forever and I love like spooky things and all of that. I like there tends to be a lot of color or a lot of contrast or like kind of a weird angle or the music is kind of off in a way that I like across the board. I know I told you you can't see anything behind this computer, but it's all just that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, it's mostly the look. It's also that, at least in animation, there tend to be really poignant moments of comfort in between all of the uncomfortable stuff, which I find really nice. Um, it fits poetry really well. It just like is a good way of incorporating plot into like every facet of the like story experience, the like music, visuals, everything really. I think that might be why I like it.
Do you have a recommendation for someone who is like, doesn't necessarily think about animated film as being in the horror genre? Do you have like a couple suggestions for people of like, oh, you should watch this film, it's animated and it's horror?
Um, I would say big ones right now are Over the Garden Wall for like children's TV. It's very good, very spooky, kind of folktale-y. Coraline is like my all-time favorite animated film. It's it manages to just visually show what, like, all the things a 12-year-old would like without it really having to pertain to the plot too much. So, but also just like everything is stop motion and it's designed, like so it's just very gorgeous and spooky. Let me think of shorts. There's this 1950s version of The Telltale Heart that Disney technically did, that's narrated by James Mason, and it's this really eerie like thing. It's not even like word for word adapted, but it's kind of a first person monologue, and I really like what they do with that. I keep making narrated work trying to chase that high, but it just I keep not getting where I want to be with it. But I love what they did with that. There's a lot of stuff with subtle shifts of light and things, which is confusing to me because they were not using digital at the time. So I'm not really sure how like fades and lighting worked when it was that technology. So I love that one. Um, yeah, Tim Burton did a really early stop motion called Vincent, about a kid who just idolizes Vincent Price and imagines his day to day being like a mad scientist or like a someone wrought with grief to the point of just despair, but he's like 12. So a lot of animation is kids material, but there's a lot of it that is not, and a lot of it that you would watch and be like, oh, I don't know if that would be for kids if I like was the one with the authority of making it for kids. So there's a lot of breadth, I think, in the material you can find. Oh, and then for shorts, there's a short called There's a Man in the Woods that came out a while ago. It's a poem, really, really good poem about a kid making up a lie and then it just kind of spreading through the parent-teacher relationship, and kind of the teacher gets kind of shafted, but it's very good.
Nice. Thank you. I'm gonna have to look up that James Mason Telltale Heart Disney project. That sounds incredible. For you, Michael, what is it that you're drawn to with the macabre and the ghostly tales and the horror films?
Sure. I think for me, it's this fascination that I've had for a long time about the world of dreams and nightmares. And to me, the horror genre, dark fantasy, they all participate, or they're reflections of this experience that we have. I mean, certainly in 1/3 of our lives as we sleep, and to the extent that we dream, this experience of being in this world that looks like this world, but things are just off. And what's more is I feel like there's a certain reality to that, and not just even, the very obvious of like nightmares and how they, there's a certain reality to nightmares. There's a lot of commonalities in some of these nightmarish experiences that we have. But in the way that something of that world also is we experience in waking reality as well. And in the way that I would say that this experience of, the dream experience is also, it's the language and the experience of the unconscious, the subconscious, and the way that, so many times we can be in, so to speak, waking reality, but we experience weirdness, synchronicities, um, and in all the ways that, if one does a deep dive in any one of your various fields of psychology, the ways that past experience, past trauma can map itself on reality, or, how projections work, or how we sometimes will relive these old experiences in the present moment. So, you know, that becomes, there's a certain weirdness to that. And there's actually, I mean, there's a certain weirdness to just what we call normal reality. Let's face it. Um, and more, I think we're seeing that these days. And so I think I'm curious about that. And there was a certain, maybe some of that interest had to do with, um, because I think horror films are fundamentally like they're hellscapes. They're the experience of being in a hell, or in the case of like Reflection of a Dead Man, he's in a purgatory, he's in a bardo, he's in this like circular world that he can't escape. And that's an experience that, I mean, I know that I've certainly experienced and sometimes still experience, and that's actually one of the definitions of hell, is like being in this closed loop where I can't seem to rid myself of this pattern, and the same thing keeps happening to me, and I keep meeting the same people, having the same relationships, and like, how do I get out of that? So I mean, I didn't think about this. This wasn't a conscious thing, but I feel like, this piece in particular was like something in my unconscious was bubbling up and wanting to be expressed. So that's about the best explanation I can give.
Okay. Thank you.
That made
I'm
any
just curious
sense
about
whatsoever?
there are some people who are just really drawn to the, like that fear of the unknown and the Lovecraftian elements. And then there seem to be people who are more drawn to like the nebulous kind of, like, as you say, like dream nightmare escape, and more macabre and ghostly aspects of like gothic horror and cosmic horror, as they relate to Lovecraft. I'm curious as to both of you, if you read Lovecraft, or and if you do, like, when is it that you discovered Lovecraft and cosmic horror?
I'm gonna fail this question because
Okay.
I read it some, but it was a long time ago. I'm aware of more concepts than I've directly read. I watched Lovecraft Country, but not all of it. So this question is not good for me.
It's okay. It's not like a test of, like, are you
Yeah.
worthy of being in the club? It's more of just curiosity of like how much of Lovecraft has influenced you, and kind of just, I just like to kind of gauge, like, where are people at, like, because everyone has to start somewhere. And
Okay,
like
I appreciate the vibes from a distance.
like I didn't really discover Lovecraft until well, I had discovered it in high school but didn't know. After my junior prom, I watched Reanimator over at a friend's house, and I was like, didn't really realize it was an adaptation of Herbert West Reanimator. I just thought it was like a funny, cool movie. And then years later, discovered, the stories, and I had already read Poe from a very young age, and loved stories that were just spooky and creepy like that, but weren't necessarily like bloody or shocking or anything like that. So for me, the aesthetic fit once I discovered that, like, oh, Lovecraft is a writer and here's what he wrote. So it kind of, that all fit together for me pretty well. How about you, Michael? Like, did you start reading Lovecraft early or just recently?
So I found Lovecraft. I think I'd been aware of him for a long time. Yeah, I had read Poe in college, and I don't think it was until I came out to Los Angeles, and I don't remember what the sort of initial prompt was. It was I may have just been in a bookstore and seen the collection. I was like, okay, now's the time. But I mean, it was shortly after I came to LA that I started actually diving into the stories, and I think, a short time later, it was around the same time, or maybe a short time later, that I became familiar with Thomas Ligotti and his works, and the sort of mutual, well, not mutual, it was, I mean, he was influenced by Ligotti. Um, and I think it was kind of around that time that I met Tom, and I've been working with him as well, and started reading the Lovecraft stories that, um both of those authors, I think, were really important to me. And I think what was so powerful about it was that they, I mean, both in their own way, speak to this nameless horror, this nameless terror, and this feeling of, like, I consider the experience of anxiety, for example. Anxiety is, I can't put my finger on what I'm afraid of. It's just there. And it's like I'm afraid of everything. And there's something lurking under the surface in my body, in my unconscious. I can't put my finger on it, but it's there and it terrifies me. And I think that's, it's an actual physical experience, an actual psychological experience that, I mean, I've certainly experienced, and I know a lot of other people have. And that what makes Lovecraft so powerful is that he gives a certain form to that. And that, I think, one of the reasons that horror fiction is so powerful and so popular is that I feel like it creates an experience. It puts that feeling of terror and dread out there. And when I relate to it, I realized, you know what? Maybe I'm not the only one who's going through this. Maybe I'm not the only one who's experiencing this nameless dread. I mean, certainly this Lovecraft guy seemed to know what was up. And that this, the communities that come around cosmic horror and Lovecraft and Ligotti and the weird fiction authors, I think there's a very interesting aspect to that community that, I mean, I've certainly experienced at your festival and Necronomicon. It's like it tends to attract people who, I mean, among other things, have like a particular way of looking at the world, maybe slightly askance. Like maybe I shouldn't trust everything that I'm seeing. Like there's a certain, and I think that's a point of connection. Um, so there it is.
Okay. So all of us together, afraid but alone, but together.
Well, and I think that's it. When we're together and we can name the fear. I mean, I think this is maybe a popular idea, or that's been popularized, but there's this idea in exorcism that, naming the demon takes its power away.
Mhm.
And I think there's something really powerful about that, I mean, particularly in childhood where so much terror lives and so much trauma happens, that these, at the core of some of these things, are human experiences, but that in the confusion of childhood, in the confusion of emotions, these things can take on these sort of amorphous, monstrous elements. And that the first step of dealing with the darkness, and this is something, I mean, I learned this doing suicide crisis work. Like the very first thing that's important is you have to acknowledge the darkness. You have to acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the experience. And a lot of that time, that experience is going to be terror, panic, among other things. So that's very important to be able to kind of hold that experience. And I think that what cinema can do, what literature can do, is in a certain way, it creates a container for that experience that makes it bearable to experience. And so to that end, I think it does something more, or can do something more than just strictly entertainment.
Mhm. I mean, I believe that all art is some form of therapy for somebody, whether it was the person who created it or the person who's consuming it, or as a collective, collective effort, like when we're sitting in a theater with other people watching a film. Um, and there's definitely kind of a power in knowing that there's other people that are experiencing a similar thing as you, where you understand, you come to understand that, like, oh, it's not just me, I'm not just weak, or I'm not just the only one that's that this is happening to. Like, this is normal, or not normal, but you know, this is like, this is a common shared experience that people have. And
Yeah.
once you start talking about it, it kind of makes it less scary, because then you're you know, you're like, you're not the only one that's going through puberty. Like,
Yeah.
for like a better analogy. But, like, yeah, you're not the only one that's like got a weird growth, or like, got hair sprouting from unexpected places. Well, thank you for indulging my curiosity about kind of the psychology behind what attracts people to horror, and for revealing a little bit of the behind the scenes behind both of your films. And thank you. Oh, do you have a recommendation for films that kind of speak to what you just laid out, if you were trying to explain that to somebody and wanted to recommend a film to them,
Oh gosh.
or a couple?
I mean, I don't know if this is directly illustrative of the concept, but one of the films I keep coming back to is The City of Lost Children, which is one of my favorite films of all time, that I feel like it communicates this, just this dreamlike experience in such a beautiful way. I mean, that's one of the things that I love. And you know, I, I think on the other hand, like David Lynch is probably one of the few like surrealist, like proper surrealist filmmakers. I mean, I guess him and Jodorowsky I would kind of put at the top, but like a film like Mulholland Drive, which ostensibly looks like it's set in reality, and there's a certain way that the entire film is a dream. And I would offer that I think maybe all of Lynch's films are dreams from start to finish. That so I think that his films really speak to that kind of uncanny experience. That coming away from it, it's very hard to articulate, maybe even impossible to articulate, like what the experience was, but it does something. It just like, so I those are my two picks.
Okay. I would add House, the Japanese 1970s crazy fucking film. Like, the film is nuts. It's called House, or Hasu, but I think it was always intended just to be House. Which is like a, when you were talking about that dreamlike quality, it is very dreamlike, and then there's that undercurrent of like something sinister happening all at the same time. Have you guys seen it?
I saw it this
No.
last year. It's a
So good. Like, you gotta see it. It's so good. But yeah, that kind of evocative of, I was thinking Mulholland Drive when you were saying David Lynch movies, and that one in particular, I think I watched like twice, right, like back to back, twice in a row. Like, it ended, and then I watched it again immediately, because I'm like, it was a part of a, what did I just watch? And I don't want this weird feeling to be over yet. That kind of like fantasy, bigger than life, and yet somehow like just a little off track of how
Yeah.
life is. So anyways, thank you again. I just want to thank you again for joining me in the Q&A and providing so much food for thought. Before we sign off and say goodbye to everybody, I would love for you to just let people know where to find more of your work, or if they want to follow you on social media, where they can do that.
All of my work is under my name, but with more letters. It's Andrea Schmitz, with 3 Z's at the end. But my name is in the film and hopefully the programming. But that's AndreaSchmitzz.com, or on Instagram or anything. And then Andrea Sparaccio, which is AndreaSparacio. And that's her website. Her Instagram is Art Sparrow. This film, Mistletoe, is currently under password, but it'll be out next year, and we have a trailer up. So, and behind the scenes and whatever.
Cool. Thank you. And Michael, where can people find more of your stuff?
Sure. On Instagram, I'm M Schlain, MSHLAIN, no C. And otherwise, I have a film that's out and about, which played in 2019 HP Festival called In a Foreign Town. And that can be found at inaforeigntown.com, or also a slightly different version on YouTube.
Okay. Just side note on the In a Foreign Town, it seemed like that was a pilot. Did anything else develop with that, or is there gonna be
I am working on it. Working on a long form adaptation, so that is still in process.
Okay, excellent. So follow Michael and see what that progress is. Follow Andrea and the other Andrea on Instagram. I'll put all this information in the show notes too, so people can refer to it. But yeah, we'll keep an eye out for you guys and keep in touch. And please make more films. Yay!
Yes, indeed.
Thanks both of you, and goodbye,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Thank you so much.